Let's welcome Eva with a warm round of applause.
Great, thank you. So I'm Eva Karlstrom, and this talk is on alternatives to the police. And I'm wearing this shirt today because this is one of the 40 or so that I've had as Oregon Country Fair security over many years. And it turns out that the major alternative to the police approach and intervention is actually derived from the same people who train the Oregon Country Fair security. So I'm pretty excited about that. I didn't actually realize that when I started researching this talk. I just knew it was one of the models out there, but it turns out to be the model. So I wanted to start off, okay, well, actually, I'm going to start off by sharing kind of a joke thing, but this is a card from a game. The game is called Democratic Socialism Simulator, if you want to go look it up. If it's too small, it has a Black Panther character. It says, "Cops are overused. We need unarmed first responders trained to handle mental health issues and minor conflicts." Bad idea? Good idea. So basically in this talk, I will be saying, good idea. So I wanted to share, I'm not the only one thinking this. There are cities all over the country currently looking at this. So when we talk about alternatives to the police, we are talking about defunding the police. And people seem to mean different things by this term. Some people are like, oh my God, how can you defund the police? Don't we need the police? I'll get to that. When we talk about defunding, we're talking about removing at least some of the funding from police budgets and redirecting it to other approaches for handling social problems. We can remove their ability to be an occupying army with weapons of war. They don't need military equipment. We can reduce their presence in numbers, and we can end police intervention where police aren't the appropriate response. When we talk about defunding something, we don't necessarily mean defunding entirely. But it has a smaller budget. It can't provide as many services. Some people who talk about defunding the police do want to defund the police entirely, to abolish the police. So you might ask me, why, do you want to abolish the police? Is that what we're talking about here? Well, at the beginning of this year, I would have thought that was kind of absurd. But I've heard some really good arguments recently put forward by the police. We've all recently seen the police forces of cities all over the U.S. respond to widespread protests against police brutality against Black people with a massive week-long demonstration of police brutality against protesters who overwhelmingly were nonviolent, against reporters, against bystanders, including children. We watched half the Atlanta police force call in sick to protest one of them being charged with murder. It's impossible not to see that we have a really widespread, a ubiquitous problem with police brutality and with the whole police culture, with the whole institution of police. Policing came to exist originally to suppress human rights. That is actually what it was for. And modern police departments are still deeply invested in control by fear and violence, by us, them thinking, by white supremacy, and no amount of training or internal policy change is going to get anywhere near that. We need something way more than the kinds of changes people call reform. We need something more like revolution. We need to completely change the institution, who it is, how it's run, what it's for. We need to change the way we handle social problems so thoroughly that police isn't the right name anymore. An appropriate description in Seattle tech industry terms might be, let's disrupt the police. So why? I'd like to draw from a short piece called The Case for Police Abolition in 10 Slides by Maya Ettinger. I only found it in a Facebook link form. I'll link all my sources in the chat at the end, so if you want to look anything up, you'll have that. I thoroughly recommend reading her piece. 1, police were not created to keep us safe. They were created to keep slaves captive and to protect property. 2, police do not prevent crime. The vast majority of police time is spent patrolling and issuing citations. When they arrest someone for a crime, it's nearly always long after the fact. 3, police do not protect women. Police assault women, commit domestic abuse, both at much higher rates than average citizens, and they infamously fail to investigate rapes. They also steal more than burglars do. Civil asset forfeiture has outpaced other forms of theft other than wage theft. They shoot mentally ill people in high numbers. Adults with severe mental illness account for 1 in 4 people killed in police encounters. 4, police are conditioned to fear everyone. It's part of their training. 5, we are conditioned to valorize police, to count them as heroes no matter what their actual behavior. 6, no good apples. People talk about, oh, it's just a few bad apples. The entire phrase is, one bad apple spoils the whole barrel. We have not just barrels of spoiled apples, we have whole truckloads of barrels of spoiled apples. If you have one apple and the rest of the apples are saying, no, no, he's fine, you have a bad barrel of apples. There's an article called Confessions of a Former Bastard Cop that I strongly recommend everybody read. Again, it will be in my sources. It's from someone who used to work as a cop, was deeply, deeply invested in cop culture, and is saying, no, it's all bad. We did all these terrible, terrible things. I did them. It's part of the culture. You can't get it out. 7, white people are afraid of black people. This is a truth in our culture. Even people who don't think of themselves as racist have a bias against black people, and that's including black people as well as white people, but especially white people. And when that comes together with the us-them thinking and the fear of a cop with a gun, it results in lots of black people getting shot. 8, why not reform? Doesn't work. The whole concept is rotten, and it's not enough. Where reform's been tried, there's been very little change. There's an article, I was an investigator of Portland police conduct, here's why it doesn't work, that goes into that in more detail. 9, better solutions exist. That's what I'll be talking about most today. This is my favorite quote from the slide series. It's difficult to argue that heavily armed men who believe they're about to be killed are the optimal method to regulate traffic, deal with sex work, address homelessness and evictions, resolve issues in grade schools and high schools, monitor protests, or manage mental illness. Yep. There are other solutions. Conflict resolution, restorative justice, decriminalization. We'll talk most about conflict resolution today. We can reallocate resources from police to public services, reduce crime, address other things in other ways. She's got lots more detail in the actual piece, and then her sources in the final slide. So if we need to replace police intervention with something else, what do we replace it with? Don't we need the police, even if they are out there being scared and shooting people? Not for most things. Number 1, let's decriminalize a lot of things. We don't need to have sex work and drug use and homelessness be criminal offenses. If we make a lot of harmless things be not crimes, we have just reduced crime, and we don't have to have the police intervene at all. So we can start with that. We can have unarmed safety officers for traffic and parking enforcement, other kinds of regulatory enforcement. That person doesn't have to have a gun. We can explore restorative justice as an approach for many kinds of things. I don't have a lot of knowledge on that. I'm not going to go into that. And we can have nonviolent crisis intervention teams. Nonviolent crisis intervention teams combined with more money for public services. We can help people out of the desperate conditions that lead them into crime and to other personal crises that cause trouble. Provide more health care, including mental health care, provide welfare and food assistance, housing assistance, education assistance, job opportunities. Can this sort of thing really be done, though? Sounds kind of utopian. Yes, it's already being done successfully, has been done for 30 years in Eugene, and is being adopted by more and more cities. So in Eugene, Oregon, and the neighboring city of Springfield, there is a group called Cahoots. And it started 30 years ago as a service of Whitebird Clinic, which is a clinic set up by a bunch of hippies, mostly anarchists, who didn't trust the police establishment all that much to begin with. Cahoots is short for Community Assistance Helping Out on the Streets, but it also is a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek name because it is actually a collaboration with the Eugene Police. It's funded by part of the police budget, and they work in partnership with the police, providing services instead of the police. The Whitebird Clinic provides free and low-cost medical services, and it also provides the humanistic intervention training for the security teams at the Oregon Country Fair. It's been doing that even longer than it had Cahoots. I've had this training nearly every year since I was about 10 years old. And it's an excellent foundation for shifting perspective from fighting bad guys to helping people. And that is the approach that Cahoots is using. So when someone calls 911 in Eugene, or in Springfield, it's calling the police non-emergency number. If they report a situation that doesn't need firefighters, an ambulance, or an armed response, it usually gets directed to Cahoots. And Cahoots may also be called onto the scene by police or fire if they find that Cahoots would be a more appropriate response. When a Cahoots team is called out, they show up in a white van with the Dove logo of Whitebird on the side. They're wearing casual clothes. It's one medic and one mental health counselor. Nobody's armed. They have radios to call for backup, but that's it. They deal with people who are mentally ill, intoxicated, in medical distress, homeless, or otherwise having some kind of personal crisis that's affecting themselves or others, but does not require an armed intervention, as most things don't. Chris Hecht, the executive coordinator of Whitebird, says the team can arrive at the scene of a homeless person experiencing a mental or physical health crisis. They can defuse the situation and prevent harm in ways that police officers are neither trained nor equipped to do. Unlike police, Cahoots can provide first aid, counseling, referrals, and transportation to services. The police can't even give you a ride somewhere unless they've put you in handcuffs first. They can help people get food, shelter, medical care, treatment for addictions. They work with a network of local clinics and other services. Every Cahoots crisis worker gets 500 hours of training, including medical care, conflict resolution, and crisis counseling. They're trained to handle the acute social issues by working on the problems that are solving them. About 60% of the people they intervene with are homeless, and about 30% have severe or persistent mental illness. So you can see there's a chunk of the population that they're going to be handling over and over again, and it's much better for them to be handling them than the police. Chris Hecht also said, the folks we're working with often have a history of really unfortunate interactions with police, hospitals, or other institutions. When a couple of people step out of one of our vans wearing jeans and hoodies, just right there we have a leg up on our colleagues in public safety. Because Eugene and Springfield are not particularly large cities, and because they deal with people repeatedly, they often already know the person involved and their history. So they can intervene in a very knowledgeable and compassionate way. Like, oh, that's Tom. Let's walk him away from the bus stop where he's freaking everybody out and figure out how to get him back on his medication. Now, the police may also have someone who is known to police, but their response is likely to be to arrest Tom again and leave him with a longer criminal record and more trauma and still no meds. So it's much better to have this humanistic response. When they started in 1989, Cahoots had one beat-up used van and a few hippies who were kind of cautious about the whole idea, and so were the cops. They now have 4 vans and close to 50 people. They've worked up to, they're now handling about 20% of the calls to emergency services, about 28,000 calls a year. They've requested police backup less than 1% of the time, and they have had no serious injuries. They cost less than $2 million, which is about 1% of the police budget. And they save at least $6 million a year in emergency medical services alone, probably more like $14 million overall. I saw different estimates in different articles. People were probably counting different things. But in any case, it's a massively valuable service, pays far, far more dividends than it costs. And it's only getting 1% of the police budget. There's a current petition right now to shift 30% of the Eugene police budget to Cahoots. Which would allow them to provide much more support services to people in need and to be able to respond to more calls. Currently, sometimes they can't respond because all 4 vans and people are already out. In an article published in the LA Times just last week, Hecht said that the Whitebird Clinic has been flooded with calls for the last couple of weeks from cities across the nation who are looking for alternatives in the face of all these protests against police brutality. And the police brutality that has been the response to that. Cities that have been looking for this, I saw a list that said nearly 20 cities, but didn't list all of them. The ones that I know of are Portland, Olympia, San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, Denver, New York, Austin, Houston, Chicago, and Indianapolis. They've all contacted Cahoots about starting similar programs, and some of them have already started similar programs. In Portland in 2017, the Oregonian newspaper's investigation found that 52% of arrests involved homeless individuals, even though they're only 3% of Portland's population. So they wanted to start a program that was more appropriate intervention. Joanne Hardesty on the Portland City Council, she's the first Black member of the City Council ever. She says, officers should have one role, solving and preventing crime, and not be cast as experts on mental health, housing, and social services. There's a better alternative to sending people with weapons to address people with mental health issues and people who are sleeping in doorways. They have a pilot project now called Portland Street Response that's based on the Cahoots model, and Hardesty is working to direct more funds to it and expand it. Olympia, Washington set up its own program modeled on Cahoots last year. I haven't read a lot of details about how that's going or how much they're committing to it. In Denver, Denver has just this month started to divert 911 calls involving nonviolent mental health issues to its own crisis response team. In Denver, 30% of the city budget goes to police and jails, so there's obviously a lot of funding there that could be reallocated. Their team is called STAR, for Support Team Assisted Response. They're planning on running the pilot program weekdays for 6 months, but they hope to continue and expand it. Albuquerque has created an alternative department called Albuquerque Community Safety. And this division will deploy unarmed personnel made up of social workers, housing and homelessness specialists, and violence prevention coordinators. In New York, the National Alliance on Mental Illness has been lobbying for shifting NYPD budget into mental health services and response. Matt Kudish of the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City says, reducing the NYPD's budget is the right move for our city, and the time is now. Our stance for quite some time now has been to fund a non-police response. And I think that reducing the NYPD's budget and reallocating these dollars into community-based services that address mental health and mental illness, that address healthcare in general, that address issues of homelessness is an appropriate reallocation of funds. He endorsed the Cahoots model or some variation of it because different cities may have different needs. So lots of cities are going toward this, but surely it can't handle every case. What about the things we really need police for? Well, what do we really need police for? What do we need armed intervention for? And what do we need legal power for? Armed emergency intervention like attempted murder in progress, pretty rare. Usually they're investigating after the fact, but we probably need some kind of team for that. And crime investigation. We can make police departments or some entirely new entity very small and just investigating these violent crimes. We don't need a lot of people to perform that role, so we can be very selective about who gets to do it. No one who has committed domestic abuse, wrongful death, rape, or any other form of violent misconduct should get to perform armed intervention on behalf of the public good. That's just common sense. We should remove qualified immunity. So if a cop kills somebody, they need to prove it was necessary to protect their life or someone else's to the same degree that anyone else would. They don't get a pass. So, in conclusion, police currently do substantial harm in the forms of violence, terror, and injustice, and in proportion, very little public good. We need to redirect most of their budgets toward completely different approaches to problems that do not involve armed violence, and instead focus efforts on solving the underlying social ills. And I would like to read a little sort of vision of the future. Imagine it's 2025, you're getting pulled over. A community representative approaches to let you know you have a tail light out. They don't need your license and registration. They don't write you a fix-it ticket. You're back on the road in less than 5 minutes. You swing by the store and grab a new light, not because you're afraid of what the city will do to you, but because you respect your community. Your neighbors got into a loud spat a few weeks ago and without fear or hesitation called a domestic assistance number. A counselor arrived and was able to talk the couple down and suggest solutions for their disagreement. No one was hurt, the kids participated in the discussion, and it's been quiet ever since. Your friend has been struggling with addiction, and you fear they might be a danger to themselves or others. You call a substance abuse specialist, and they talk you through ways to help your friend get treatment. They offer to send an agent out to speak with your friend directly and provide information on harm reduction centers in your area. Black and brown people are no longer being exploited through tickets and fines to pay for police. Trust is slowly being fostered in the community. When you see a police officer, you smile and wave rather than feel a fearful chill or avoid eye contact. You know that they're being held accountable by the citizens they have sworn to protect. They've undergone psychological evaluations to ensure that they took the job for the right reasons. They're slowly regaining respect in the community and are trained to be protectors, not warriors. Teachers are being paid a living wage and students are being given more time, attention, and education. Books are up to date and classrooms are optimized to keep up with technology. You can't remember the last time the name of a murdered Black person was used as a hashtag. Casual racism is no longer tolerated. The KKK has been classified as a terrorist organization. The Confederate flag isn't flown and has been removed from any official state flags or insignias. Hey, we're on our way on that one. Most Confederate monuments have been taken down and placed in storage or museums. Wow, this is already getting fulfilled in some ways. You trust the police to deal with crime the same way you trust firefighters to put out fires. This is what defund the police looks like. It'll be different for every department. If the corruption is bad enough, dissolution of the department may be necessary. But what we've seen in the last few weeks shows how overreaching and power-drunk many officers are. We asked too much of them and then called them heroes despite evidence to the contrary. We let them think that they could get away with anything, including murder. It's time for change.